Welcome back to the Go Have Good Sex podcast featuring the Christian Sexpert. I am Angela, the Christian Sexpert, and I am so happy to have you back with me. If you have been following my social media accounts for any length of time, you know that I talk about the fact that there are 13 different types of intimacy that you can experience in marriage, and sex is only one of them. In fact, sex is supposed to be the overflow of intimacy that you've established before you've ever reached the bedroom, which is why it is so important that you are intentionally working on the other 12 types of intimacy so that you have something to celebrate by the time that you get to the bedroom. And today I am super excited to be focusing on one aspect of those 12, and that is parenting intimacy. Kristi Crosson is a transformational parent coach and children's book author. She is a JAI certified parenting coach, children's book author, and Jesus loving mama who transformed her own parenting approach to embrace gentle parenting techniques. Through her writing and coaching, Kristi empowers parents to build stronger, more connected relationships with their children. Now, if you heard gentle parenting and you're ready to turn the episode off, I would encourage you to stick around because even if you don't fully agree with a gentle parenting approach, we aren't specifically discussing gentle parenting in today's episode. We are talking about parenting as a form of intimacy that you can establish between you and your spouse. And I understand that that's going to look different in each family. I myself am a gentle parent, and I do believe that is biblical parenting. But again, the focus of my podcast is more marriage. And so you can take the principles that Kristi and I will be discussing today and apply them no matter what style of parenting you choose to employ in your home. So, with all of that said, people sometimes give me a look when I talk about parenting as intimacy because they don't really understand what I mean when I say that. However, any wife who has just shoved a watermelon out of her vagina and then watched her husband do skin to skin with that wrinkly little watermelon knows exactly how her ovaries stood up and screamed, "Do it again! Do it again!" And any mother of a, we'll say, 10-year-old boy who has watched her husband battle his own internal traumas and triggers from his childhood to gently and tenderly instruct that 10-year-old with calm that you know he is not feeling knows exactly that primal urge to shove the kid in front of a screen so you can drag your husband to the bedroom to show him just how much you appreciate that gentle response he just offered to your child. So there's a lot of different ways that we can experience parenting intimacy. Those are just a couple really funny examples. So, Kristi, with all of those really silly examples, can you tell me why it is so important for kids that their parents are on the same parenting page?
Oh gosh. I think of it like this. Imagine, right, you're going somewhere and your kid messes up, does something, and someone all of a sudden just starts yelling and screaming at your kid for messing up, right? Like, what happens in your body? Like, I'm going to tell you, I go full on mama bear, right? Like, no one gets to talk to my children like that. Like, I don't care who you are, right? And I'm going to do everything inside of me to protect my child from this threat, right? Now imagine that threat lives in your home, right? Imagine you're trying to kindly, gently, tenderly parent your kid, and then all of a sudden, this other person comes in and is like all of their trauma, all of their own unhealed wounds, all of that just being vomited all over your child. Like, are you gonna want to bring that man back into your bedroom or are you gonna want to kick him out of the house? Right? So when we're talking parenting as intimacy and having like being on the same page when you're parenting, that's what we mean, right? Because when you see someone as a threat, your nervous system goes wah, 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 right? It's going haywire. It doesn't want to connect with that person. It wants you to run away from that person and sweep up your little kiddo with you and get them away from that threat, right? So it's a problem, right? If you're not on the same page, it's a big problem.
Yes. And it's so interesting that we are having this conversation because I was on a road trip this weekend and a colleague sent me a podcast that was actually talking about when women consent to unwanted sexual intimacy. So, this
Mm,
may also be known as marital coercion. If you have listened to my other podcasts, you heard me talk about marital coercion. But in that podcast, they actually touched on how there are some women who will consent to unwanted sexual touch as a way to manage the peace in the home and make sure that their kids are protected. She's kind of using sex to soothe dad's nervous system, to soothe his emotions
mhm,
so that he can show up as a better parent. And I don't think people understand just how intricately libido and parenting is tied because we know that obligation kills desire. We know that when women engage in unwanted sexual touch, that the next time they go to have sex, they're going to want sex even less. And so if a woman feels like she has to use her body to soothe dad, to make him a better parent, over time, she's going to want sex less and less. It's going to be harder and harder for her to continue to engage in managing his behavior and emotions through sex. And obviously that can go the other way as well with, an angry mom. But we don't see that as frequently. It's not as reported. It is, I would guess, just the way that culture socializes men and women, it's going to be happening less because men are socialized and conditioned to manage their emotions through sex, whereas women are not. And so I think a lot of people don't realize how deeply connected a woman's libido and the parenting of her partner is. The other thing that was touched on is how women have this biological drive to procreate and also ensure the safety of the species. And so when they're choosing partners, it's based on, do I think this man is going to make a good partner in maintaining the family unit until the child can be launched, right?
yeah.
And so there's an almost there is a biological underlying component to what is happening when we're talking about parenting, intimacy, and sexuality. So we already kind of touched on how parenting impacts libido. And so, one of the things that I definitely want to talk about when we are talking about the intersection of parenting and sexual intimacy and libido is I met Kristi through a ministry for natural Christian moms on Facebook, and we got to know each other through that. And she and I both have the same sort of exasperation for this type of post that we see so frequently in mommy groups. And that's new moms or moms who have a ton of littles stressing about a low libido and wanting some sort of herb or something that she can take to get her libido back so that she can make sure she is, quote, taking care of her husband, said with every ounce of sarcasm in my body. So, I want to talk with you about this cultural phenomenon and how couples would have historically handled this in the postpartum, early toddler years, and what a sort of healthy approach to this is.
Right. So there's a lot going on with this phenomenon, right? It's there's one aspect, right? You're a new mom, you're a mom of little kids, and if you've been around little kids, like they're like you're trying to keep them from jumping off of shelves, you're trying to keep them from unlocking the door and running out the front door, right? Like you're trying to keep them from, pulling the food off them onto themselves and the stove, right? Like you're just constantly trying to manage these humans, like and keep them alive, right? Like
They, I was at my friend's house this weekend. She has five kids, one of them being, 9-ish months old,
Hmm.
and the next one is kind of newly 3. And those little two man were trying to kill themselves like all weekend. Or or the toddler was like trying to harm the baby in not like a sadistic way, but he's like, let me put my feet near the baby's head. And because I
Right.
just am flailing with
I
my body.
want
And
to.
yeah,
And
because
yeah.
like I'm just flailing around on the floor and the baby isn't quick enough to move. And, you know, no forethought for you're gonna smash the baby's head, right? None. So, like just keeping the two of those children alive with my friend
Right.
this weekend. Like there were 4 active adults in this house and I was exhausted.
Right.
So
So yeah, so you're in this environment where there's all these little people, there's a lot to manage, there's a lot of needs to take care of, right? And most of the time, if you've been a mom, your needs take a back burner to everybody else's. And it's not wrong or, I mean, yes, our needs matter and it's kind of it's ebb and flow, right? But when you're in that way, right, your nervous system is like fight or flight, man. Like you are like, I'm about to fight someone or I'm going to get the heck out of here, right? And so when you are parenting and you're in the throes of like that level of exhaustion and stress and trying to manage all of the things and dealing with any of your own triggers and your own, your own trauma, right, from being parented, the last thing on your mind is going to be sexual intimacy, right? Literally the last thing. Like that is a high level, like I've got all my basic needs met, I've got my mid-level needs met, right? Like I've got my autonomy needs met. Okay, now I can focus on this desire piece, right? This is like a, like intimacy hierarchy of needs kind of thing. And if you cannot even get your bare minimum needs met, like you ain't going nowhere near the top here, right? And so the nervous system, right? Your nervous system needs safety. First and foremost, it requires and desires and wants safety in order for that libido, for that sexual desire piece to switch on, right? Like your body's gonna go into preservation mode and your body is gonna be like, nah, we don't need to do that right now. We need to get you safe first, right? We need to get you cared for first. And so you're not gonna end up with that. So then what happens is she's reading these Christian books and they're telling her, well, you need to take care of your man so that he doesn't stray or he doesn't do this or he doesn't do that and he doesn't do this. And it's like, when did I become his Holy Spirit, right? Like, when did I become the thing that is supposed to manage all of this for him? I can't even take care of myself, let alone like these other humans in my house. Now I have to also be responsible for this grown up, right? Like, you're in survival. Like you don't have any sexual things to give. You need your emotional connection needs met. You need your need for like nervous system safety met. You need all of your actual real needs taken care of. Your spiritual intimacy needs need to be met, right? Before you can even think about going to the bedroom and, giving it your all, right? And so I think what's hard is you've got moms who feel guilted and shamed for feeling like they don't have any desire. And that's just, it's a natural season, right? Your baby is only a baby until they get to not be a baby anymore, right? And that season can come and go. If you manage to get it on 4, 5, 6 times in that year, you're probably doing really great, right? Like if you manage, you're taking care of like 4 under 4, like God bless you. Like you are doing amazing if you can manage to like put on some lipstick and flash a smile at your husband, right? Like, and I don't mean that in like you don't want to, because there's a part of you that does, but you're just in such survival mode that that level of thinking just isn't even there. And I think what we've done too much in this Christian world is we've put such a high emphasis on sexual needs without actually talking about all of the things that lead us to get to that thing, right? Having that level of intimacy.
having something to celebrate, right? So
Right,
if you are framing sex as the celebration of intimacy that you've already established before you ever get to the bedroom,
right.
when you are in a season of littles,
Hmm.
there isn't a whole lot to be celebrating because your time and your attention and your entire existence is so devoted to keeping tiny humans alive.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I really want to make sure that we touch on is the biblical model for sex
Yes.
in like postpartum. So, can you tell us what we see in the Bible for postpartum sex?
Yeah. So, in Leviticus, there are actually like, and it gets hard because we're under the New Testament, we're under grace, but there's some really good stuff when you start digging into some of the Old Testament rules that aren't bad to apply, especially when they have benefits, right? So, one of them is
I
that in
want
Leviticus,
to I want to break right here
sure,
because I really want people to understand that Jesus came to fulfill the law, right?
absolutely.
This is not like a Torah observant podcast.
No,
I don't think that we are called to try and follow each and every part of the law
right,
any
right.
longer because Jesus came to fulfill it. But we know in the year 2025 that when we look at Levitical law, a lot of the Levitical laws were given to the Jewish people for health and safety reasons. Not
Yes.
every Jewish law is a spiritual law. So, for example, the we know very common knowledge is that Jews were prohibited from eating pork
Right.
and that pigs are considered an unclean animal.
Hmm.
And scientifically, we can look at that and know that is because the risk of foodborne illnesses was so much greater with
Hmm.
pork than with other sorts of meat that they had available to them.
Right.
And the same goes with thou shalt not eat any sort of bottom feeder fish. So, like shrimp is a
Right.
very common, Jews cannot eat shrimp. And again, that is because they didn't have the science that enabled them to ensure that that food source would have been safe for them.
Right.
And so a lot of the Levitical laws are not just frivolous,
Hmm.
just for funsies on God's behalf sort of commands. They are
Right.
given to a people that lacked the scientific knowledge to understand the reasoning why shrimp could potentially be unsafe, right? And so when we're talking about postpartum laws for the Jewish people, it is designed to protect the newborn and the mother. Because remember, they didn't have formula. If the mother died, that baby
Right.
was probably going to die because there wouldn't be someone to
Hmm.
nurse it.
Right.
Because while wet nurses were definitely a cultural phenomenon, they weren't a dime a dozen.
Right.
And you needed the mother to be safe and protected and healthy in
Hmm.
order to keep the infant alive as well. And
Right.
so I want us to bear in mind when we're having this conversation that these laws are designed for the protection of the postpartum mother
Right.
and the baby. So
Right.
in Leviticus,
Absolutely.
what do we see?
So what we see in Leviticus 12 specifically, is that after the birth of a boy, there's a total of 40 days that a woman is considered unclean and should abstain from sexual intercourse and sexual activity. After the birth of a girl, it's actually double that. It's 80 days. And so that protective aspect, if you've ever had a baby, women, how many days does it take for that to stop bleeding? How many days does it take for that swelling to go down? How many days does it take to actually like feel like you could want something else to go back in there after you pushed out that watermelon, right? So we we look at Leviticus and we see that God wanted his people to remain abstinent for what? I mean, 80 days is almost 3 months, right?
And
And
so, but does God say that she should give him a hand during this 40 or 80 days?
no, because during unclean times, women weren't supposed to be touching the men in general. So it would have followed similar to a woman being on her period and being unclean and needing a cleansing period. And after cleansing, then he could be touching her. So women would not have been expected to perform any kind of sexual favors or sexual activity with their spouse during this time. It would have been just a period of rest for her to heal from having a baby and to develop that nursing relationship so that, Lord willing, she would have stayed alive, the baby would have stayed alive, and they would have, continued to have a good long life.
And so he would have been expected to remain abstinent for that 40 days.
Absolutely. Culturally, yes, that is what the expectation would be. It would be, obviously they didn't have screens to go looking at things on. They wouldn't have had, other ways to meet that need. They would not have been allowed or expected to self-serve themselves even necessarily.
But the
Uh,
modern church tells us men need sex every 3 days.
yeah, and that's based on information that's not exactly
Girl,
scientifically
we're
sound.
gonna we're gonna we're gonna do it. We are This is a 100% Dobson hate station.
Yeah.
Dobson made that up. It's nonsense and it speaks to
Mhm.
his own sex addiction. Okay?
Yeah.
It's not a real thing.
No,
Okay?
it's not.
Like,
It's not. And the idea that a man cannot control their sexual desires goes against the very nature of the gospel inside of us, right? Jesus says that, one of the fruits of the spirit is what? Self-control, right? And if a man cannot control himself for more than 72 hours to not need some sort of sexual release, then that man has a bigger issue than his wife being postpartum or on her period or sick or tired or headachy or overwhelmed by babies, right? Like that's not a her problem. And yes, we need to stop making excuses for the sexual addiction of men in our culture and men in the church and giving them license to take advantage and emotionally abuse and manipulate their wives into giving favors when she's not a willing party.
so I want to make a couple of points here.
Absolutely.
I have built a platform on good sex, on
Yes.
biblical sex.
Hmm.
Biblical sex is always mutually pleasurable.
Yes.
And asking your 3 week postpartum wife to give you a hand because you are suffering is not a mutually pleasurable experience
No.
for her. And that is not supporting her in the
Hmm.
parenting intimacy realm. Good sex is supposed to be mutually pleasurable. And there's not a whole lot of women who find sex mutually pleasurable when they are freshly postpartum.
Mm-mm.
Are there exceptions to that rule? Absolutely. I
Sure.
have, every time I talk about this on my socials, some woman is going to show up in the comments and be like, well, I was wanting to jump my husband in the hospital bed because I wanted him. And I'm like, okay, like cool for you,
Yeah.
but let's not
That's awesome.
promote that as normal
Right.
because that harms postpartum women who are suffering.
Hmm.
Right? Like let's
Yeah.
maybe, if the conversation is about is postpartum sex necessary, let's maybe keep those as inside thoughts because someone's husband out there is like, well, Sally wanted it in her hospital bed. Why can't you be like Sally? Right? And so
Hmm.
we want to be sensitive in the way that we're having these conversations because I honestly like if you are one of those women I am really happy for you because
Hmm.
I don't want you suffering in the postpartum. Like I want
Yeah.
you to be enjoying sex. I want you. Okay, I'm losing the plot. So to get back on topic, one of the things that I say is healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason.
Hmm.
And so if your wife is turning down sex, there's a reason and you need to figure out why. Pregnancy
Hmm.
and postpartum falls under that healthy women because yes, pregnancy and postpartum is not any sort of illness that
Hmm.
usually needs medically addressed,
Right.
right? Because God designed our bodies and sometimes medical interventions are necessary, so don't get angry with me. But they are a natural function of the human body, but they are also an altered state of hormonal balance from
Right.
the ideal that God designed us to experience.
Hmm.
And for we know that when things go out of whack from God's design, you're either going to go super high or you're going to go super low. And so for some women, their sex drive goes super high in pregnancy and postpartum, And for other women, their sex drive goes super low in pregnancy and postpartum. And both of those are variations of normal and ought to be respected. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, there's such a like libido is not just this switch that you can flip, like, hey babe, like you looking sexy today, right? And you've got like vomit and like kid poop on you and the house is a disaster and you smell like 3-day BO, right? Like that's not necessarily sexy time, right? Like, maybe what's more sexy in that moment is like, hey babe, I've got the baby. I'm gonna tidy up in here while I baby wear, and you go get yourself a shower and go lay in the bed for a little while, right? Like that's so much more sexy than like, hey babe, I need a hand job, right? Like that's just not,
if
yeah.
if if any man is listening has actually not rage quit this podcast yet, baby wearing is the biggest aphrodisiac to a
Hmm.
postpartum mother that I
Absolutely.
can possibly think of.
Hmm.
I wanted to jump my husband every time he put our infant in the wrap. And like the ergo just isn't the same as like an actual baby wrap. I'm a little bit of a baby wearing snob.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
that's
okay.
just me. I think one of the
Yeah.
conversations that needs to be had when we're talking about parenting as intimacy and as it relates to sexuality is he cultivating time and space for her to exist as a human being who is
Hmm.
not mom?
Well, and who is also not wife and fulfiller of sexual needs, because I think
Right.
there's this expectation that they should be willing just because they're married. And while they are maybe in part willing because they're married, that's only part of the story, right? Like desire is going to grow when there's trust, when there's safety, when gentleness is present, right? Like moms need a lot of emotional safety to be able to feel sexy and to be able to feel like sexual beings. Like when you are food factory and you are diaper changer and you are, right, housekeeper and you are, right, like schedule keeper, maker, meal planner, like all of the things, right? When you are doing all of these things and creating this space where everybody's needs are getting met, you're not gonna feel safe enough if your needs aren't also being met, right? Scripture tells us husbands are to love their wives as Christ loves the church and laid his life down for her. It's not really a laying of your life down when she's newly postpartum, when she's home with homeschool kids all day long, whatever it is. It's not loving your wife as Christ loves the church when you come home and start demanding sex, right? Like that's just not loving her well. That's not seeing her as a human being, as an individual. That's seeing her as a meter of your sexual needs. That's consuming her and using her. That's not intimacy, right? Like we can have sex without having intimacy. That's a thing,
Yes.
right? And so the better way, the Christ-centered way, the godly, righteous way is cultivating intimacy at all levels. And when it's time, that sexual need will be met. And if you're a man and you don't know how to meet your emotional and other like base level needs and you're trying to meet it through sex, like get yourself a coach, get yourself a therapist because you need help. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but you need help to be able to see that, oh, your emotional needs matter, and that's a base level need for you. Your nervous system needs to feel safe, and that's a base level need for you. But sex isn't going to fix those things. Sex just is going to soothe it for a minute. So,
We can't rely on someone else to regulate our emotions and
right.
our nervous system
Hmm.
because that person, that's not God's design and calling on that person's life. And
Right.
that's not, and if what happens if she's out of town or God forbid she dies, like how are you going to regulate yourself then? Right.
Right.
It's not a long-term solution. And
Hmm.
so, one of the things that I really want to talk about is because it's not just, oh my God, my husband's so hot when he baby wears, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And it's not just like leave your postpartum wife alone. right?
Right.
It is the actual like nitty-gritty of parenting. Parenting is flipping hard. Parenting reveals
Mm.
all of your triggers and traumas and all of the unhealed parts of yourself that you didn't even know existed. And then you also have your spouse going, "Hey, look at that. That's not cool." Right? Or,
Right.
whatever the case may be. So, how do people, if they are experiencing conflict in the parenting arena, how do they have those conversations without making it a bigger thing? How do we help guide couples who are experiencing parenting conflict?
I think it's getting to the core of your values in parenting. I think too many people don't actually talk about, right? Or maybe they don't even know, right? Like you get married, you're like, okay, we're both Christians, good, we're good to go, right? And you don't really necessarily talk about, maybe you do, but not everyone does. You don't necessarily talk about all of the details of exactly how you're parented. Like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I turned out fine. My parents were fine. My parents were great, right? But then when you start digging into the nitty-gritty, you realize like, oh, this person was completely emotionally unavailable, and this parent spanked you a lot, right? And this parent, right, was constantly yelling and screaming. And so you felt like everything in the house had to be perfect to try to manage that person's emotions, right? Like your parents' emotions. And so now you have this child who's who's now in this space and they don't listen, right? Because they're kids. They don't just do what you demand of them instantly. They're not little soldiers. They're humans with their own thoughts, needs, desires, developmental spaces and like, wherever they're at developmentally, right? And so you you're coming into now your parenting relationship, your marriage with things that you didn't realize were gonna impact you, right? It's not like people normally come in and they're like, "Oh yeah, I know all this stuff is good." Going to impact me when I have a baby and when my toddler starts to tell me no. Like I'm going to get into a fit of rage because my 2-year-old says no, right? Like what is that? Right? Like it just seems so ridiculous. A 2-year-old tells you no and you're all of a sudden raging and you're flipping out, right? Like that's not okay, but there's a reason for that. And it's not because your child has told you no, it's because there's something inside of you that's unhealed and it's being triggered by that no, right? And I think what's really important is getting onto the same page, right? Like I'm a proponent of gentle parenting. I do believe, like you, Angela, that gentle parenting is biblical parenting. It's not permissive, it's discipleship. And when you can get on the same page as each other and you can be in agreement on what your parenting is going to look like and how you're going to handle things, right? When one of you starts to get triggered, the other one can step in and be like, "Hey, babe, you're getting a little triggered right now. Let me finish this right now while you go take a minute," right? And you can hand off that baton back and forth, right? Like he can come home, he can be like, "Oh man, you're like stressed, mama. Like go take a break, right? Like I got the kids, right?" And you can pass that baton back and forth, and it doesn't become about being the right parent, being the one who's always in the right. It becomes about parenting in unity and parenting in a way that meets your children's needs developmentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, in all the ways that you're supposed to as a parent.
One of the things that I see a lot,
Mhm.
especially in the mommy groups on Facebook, is one parent has done a lot more research on a certain parenting style, and the other person is just sort of along for the ride.
Yeah,
And until they have usually encountered their own trigger or trauma, and all of a sudden they have a really strong opinion on this like parenting thing that they want
right.
to exert their opinion or control or whatever over. And that brings a lot of conflict, not just
Hmm.
between both parents and the child, but
Right.
also between the parents.
Hmm.
And how do you sort of navigate that situation?
Well, I think it really I'm going to say it depends. I'm going to give you a few different tips as kind of a framework, But this whole conversation could be its own conversation on its own because there's a lot to it. So I think the biggest thing is, we're going to lean in, kind of the way we do with gentle parenting. We want to be curious as much as possible without harshly criticizing, right? You're going to want to be curious. What did discipline look like for your spouse growing up, right? What did their home life look like? Was there a lot of chaos? Was there anybody who had any kind of addiction in their home, right? Like, what was that space and how did that space make them feel, right? Like, obviously, you're not going to be the therapist to your spouse, but you're going to want to have a little bit of curiosity so that you can know, like, oh, like they were often punished for like not eating all of their peas off of their plate, right? So you know that come dinner time, if your kid doesn't want to eat what you've made, that spouse should not be the one with the baton. That spouse needs to kind of like take themselves out of the situation so that you can handle that situation, right? Or they can learn about how to handle that situation and step in. But we can't lead with our fear and our trauma, right? So the next thing you're going to want to do is if you're approaching and you're wanting to take on a different parenting style than your spouse, you want to model it. You don't want to just tell them what to do. Start just living on your own. You have every right and every authority to parent your children in the ways that work for you and their relationship and preserve that connection and preserve their relationship with you. It doesn't mean that you're going to tell them yes all the time and you're going to be permissive. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is parenting with connection, with good boundaries, and with understanding of child development, right? You're going to want to try to partner with your child as much as possible, not just boss them around. So you're going to want to model that, whatever that's looking like for you. If you are switching into a more gentle parenting style, or, you're just trying to get rid of, spanking for now, right? Or whatever it is, you're going to want to model what you're doing first and foremost, right? When your spouse sees the relationship with your kids still thriving, it may not, but it may cause their hearts to soften and they might get curious with you about like what it is you're doing to keep a good relationship with your kids. Another thing is invite, don't demand. Say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Like, here's a quick podcast. Here's a quick clip. Here's a thing. Here's, oh, that situation that you said, like, that you wanted some ideas on how to handle it. Here's a little thing about that, right? And so just, a blurb, a blip, an Instagram post, whatever it is, and you want to invite them in. But it's okay to go through books together. You can get coaching together. You can even get therapy if needed, right? Like it's okay. You want to invite them into this situation, not demand everything in of them. Another one is you can, now I know this goes against probably most advice when it comes to marriage, especially with wives to their husbands. You can step in gently when necessary, right? If your spouse, your husband, is going off on your child and screaming in their face, like that's abusive. That's just straight up not okay. You can step in if they're becoming too dysregulated, if they start yelling, and you can say, hey, I got this one. Take a breather. It's okay, right? Like it's okay for you to, I've got this. You're too angry to handle this. I'm going to handle it right now, right? You don't want them doing this thing anymore. I've got your back. We're gonna do it, but we're not gonna do it that way because that's not gonna help, right? Protecting your child is gonna be far more important than helping your spouse save face. And I know that's gonna go, it's gonna ruffle a lot of people's feathers, but you're not gonna be nitpicking, right? Like if they have a little bit of an attitude, if they kind of snap a little bit, like you're not gonna be nitpicking every tiny little thing, right? I'm talking about like they're getting screamed at for, I don't know, their shoes are on the wrong feet and your child refuses to switch them back or something, right? Like something that's just not okay. You're going to step in and that's okay. You can do this firmly. You can do it gently. You can be loving and you can still preserve your marriage when you do it. And you can have a conversation about it later. Hey, right? Like, let's talk about what happened there. What was going on for you, right? Like, you don't have to be like, well, you're the crappiest father ever. You can be like, hey, I noticed you got really angry when they didn't want to switch their shoes onto the other feet. Well, like, what's going on? That seems like a really big trigger for such a small thing. And you can start to have those conversations when they're regulated, right? Um, Being a united front is really for, saying no to ice cream or turning off the TV. It's not for one of the spouses is not exhibiting self-control in their parenting. And so that's something really important to have a nuance. There are also going to be those of you who are watching this who may be in a truly abusive marriage, and these are not going to work for you. And I'm just going to encourage you to go get help because that's not something that marriage therapy can fix. That is not something that a coach can fix. That's something that you need some serious professional help for. And so I want to encourage you to just go get that help, right? If it's scary, if you're frightened, if you think someone in that house is going to get hurt, this is my little spiel. Go get help. It's okay. The other thing, I mean, obviously, pray, stay soft, keep the big picture in view, right? One parent snapping at their kid one time isn't going to necessarily be a big deal in the long run, right? When you're thinking of, 18 years of parenting before your kid gets out of the house. So make sure that you are willing to have heart transformation and that you're willing to be patient, right? And again, you can have some, some parameters, even some boundaries within your parenting. But let God work on their heart as he's working on yours as well. And just pray. Like if the Holy Spirit's leading you to parent differently than what you were raised as a kid, as your husband was raised as, God's gonna do the work in his time. But be willing to seek out therapy, coaching, other resources as needed because generational patterns sometimes need help, right? You can't always do it on your own. That's kind of the framework for it, right? You want to be curious, you want to model the fruit, you want to invite them, you want to step in gently when necessary, and then just keep everything in prayer, right? I think that can definitely help in that situation when you aren't aligned with your parenting. Whoever's the default parent, in my opinion, kind of gets top choice on the matter. If you're the default parent, you're the one that's doing 90% of the parenting anyway, you kind of get to lead in that way, and that's okay. But invite your spouse, invite your husband along for it because what's going to happen is it's going to create more intimacy when you guys are a united front. So that's
Okay. So
that's a lot.
if it's really good. So if a couple is struggling to get on the same page with parenting and they want to reach out to a coach for help getting on that same page and learning some better parenting techniques and things that
Mhm.
they can implement together, how can they do that?
I am a parenting coach, so you can reach out to me. You can hop on Instagram, you can look on parenting coaches, you can ask in other groups if anyone's used a coach. There are so many different resources. It's so hard to know how to exactly direct you to the right one for you. You generally want to pick someone, if you're a Christian and having someone's Christian really important to you. Um, you want to look for someone who has training and understanding in the kinds of materials that are important to you, right? You don't want to pick a coach that's a Dr. Dobson fan when you are Amanda and David Erickson fan, right? Like those are two polar opposites, for instance, right? Like you want to choose coaches that are promoting resources that promote the kind of parenting style that you want to implement in your home with your husband. And so you can hop online. I like Instagram, has a lot of great coaches. Jai Institute for Parenting has a whole list of coaches. You can find ones that handle like neurodivergence, if you have a blended family, because of divorce, if you have teenagers, if you have little babies, right? Like there's all kinds of ways to search out for those coaches on there as well.
Kristi and I will kind of brainstorm a little bit. We will drop some of our favorite parenting resources in the show notes for you. But just to wrap up today's episode, I want to reiterate that parenting is one of the necessary forms of intimacy that you need to have well established before you have something to celebrate in the bedroom. That is, of course, if you have kids. If you don't have kids, well, thank you for staying for this whole episode. Uh, it's a good thing to talk about for the future if you don't have kids yet. But
Yes.
I think it's really important that people learn about honoring a postpartum season and God's
Mhm.
design for sexual intimacy
Yes.
for the ancient Jews, because the common narrative that we see in the evangelical church today does not line up biblically
Mhm.
as far as sexual intimacy goes, and that there is really nothing sexier than an involved, calm, willing to learn
Mhm.
and parent the kid that you have and not the kid that you want to have
Mhm.
parent. I think that's one of the mistakes I see a lot in parenting is people parenting the kid that they want, parenting the kid they think they are supposed to have, parenting the kid that they feel that their kid should be
Hmm.
and not the kid that's actually sitting there in front of them.
Right.
And I think having conversations about who your kid is and does that match up with the vision of who they are in each other's heads is a really great exercise for talking about parenting intimacy. One night, get the kids down, sit down with a beverage, put the phones away, and ask, who do you see our child as in this season of their life? And does that match up with what I see them to be? And what is the reality of the kid that we have, and how do we parent them in this season? Because the seasons change. There was a season where my kid was throwing himself bodily at the walls for the sensory input of it,
Hmm.
and we've, thank God, grown out of that season. And now we're in this season of, if you say skibbity one more time, every parenting philosophy I have ever owned goes out the window. So it isn't just the dads that lose their tempers. Just
Yes.
yesterday, my husband told me, you need to dial it back. I know you're crabby, but dial it back. And I was like,
Hmm.
you don't get to tell me to dial it back. I'm the one that has to tell you to dial it back all the time. And that was a marriage and parenting moment that really happened. And because we don't have a perfect marriage. So if you want help getting on the same page with parenting, definitely reach out to Kristi for some coaching. If you need help with establishing all of the types of intimacy in your marriage, if you have, through this episode, realized that sex is more of an obligation than it is a celebration, and you want help cultivating an intentional plan for all 13 types of intimacy in your marriage, reach out to me and we can get coaching set up to cultivate that plan specific to your marriage. Because remember, you deserve to have good sex.